Welcome back to episode number 2, Hustle Nation. I hope you're having a great day wherever you're listening or watching from. Today, we're going to talk about the imposter syndrome, and we're going to share our stories specifically of how and what our imposter syndrome is. And, you know, what's interesting to me is just recently, Dustin, I'll share with you shortly, I had a moment of imposter syndrome. And I really, truly believe that everybody experiences it, whether you're Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk or insert any successful individual, athlete, musician, whoever that is at any level. We all go through it. And we will continue to go through and we'll fight imposter syndrome. But before we go any further, Dustin, tell our lovely listeners, what is imposter syndrome?
So imposter syndrome is that feeling you have when you're undertaking something, right? You're taking on a new role or you're taking on a new venture, and all of a sudden that voice in your head is saying, "Why the heck are you doing this? You're not qualified to do this. No one's gonna care. No one's gonna listen. What value do you create in this?" And it's been interesting, as we talk about it. I mean, we all experience it, and most of us experience it time and time again, right? And it's we all experience it differently, but how we deal with it is really the key, because you're going to have it. It's just I know for me, looking back, I never really knew the term until maybe the last few years. I wish I would have known the term 20 years ago, because it would have allowed me to define what I was going through, and frankly, I think it would have been better to get through it.
Yeah, no question. I mean, I could tell you so many instances of when I had imposter syndrome, but most recently, and I come from a marketing background, and as you listen to the podcast, well, I'll share more about that. I always hate talking about myself, so I'm not quick to peacock about my background. But I will say, so being around marketing for a long time, I've always had goals and aspirations of being well known in that space. And so after a lot of hard work, I was recently asked by a university if I would be a lecturer, or otherwise known as an adjunct professor. And that to me was a bit of a defining moment where I had the opportunity to do that. But I also said, typically to have a position like that, you need to have an MBA or PhD. And many of my colleagues have those and multiple. And so I had a moment of, why me? I don't even know if I'm qualified. Now, at the core, I know I'm qualified to teach the content, but I don't know that I'm qualified to be teaching at a university level. And so I had to remind myself, and again, these are moments that don't define you, but you either have to choose, I feel like an imposter. Do I continue? Am I good enough? And my brain said, yeah, I am good enough. I know the content. I'm going to enjoy the hell out of this. And I believe I can give the students a phenomenal experience and really bring them a lot of real world experience and knowledge that they might not gain just learning out of a textbook. Yeah. And so that was one of so many. And how I overcame that was self-talk, really, and not allowing self-doubt to be the champion there. And I had shared that with other people, not so much that, I'm feeling like an imposter, but I just said, it's a bit of a humbling moment, and it's exciting, but it's like, wow. And they're like, a couple of people said, you're more than qualified to do this. And that's when I said, yeah, you're right. I shouldn't even think about that. I don't know why I'm thinking about this, but everybody has it. And I've been in this industry for over 20 years. So I shouldn't for a moment begin to think that I can't do it. And I'd be curious. I know you've got a couple that we've talked about, but I want to hear one of your imposter syndrome stories.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Every step of my career, I feel like I've had imposter syndrome. One of the more recent ones that was really interesting to me was, I've been CEO of McClone now for about 5 years. And so we're about 120 people, right? So we have, it's not just me leading a few people, it's me leading leaders. And one of the most interesting things was I'll never forget it. It was when all of a sudden one of our leaders repeated something that I said. And that kind of blew my mind because I was like, hold on, I just kind of say stuff, right? I'm just kind of talking about stuff, right? And all of a sudden it's, oh, you're repeating what I said. And, thankfully I think it was a good nugget. I mean, that's why she was repeating it, but it was one of those kind of light bulb moments where all of a sudden I'm like, hold on, I am the leader. So you have to embrace it. Right. And, to your point, it wasn't that there are times when you feel like you're not qualified. There's times when you feel like I didn't recognize really the position I was in. So that one was a really interesting one to me. But I'll give another example. At one point, I was on a board of directors on a bank board, and so I am today too. But this was actually a different bank. And at the time, I was a lot younger than most of the other people in the room. And I'll never forget when they voted me to be the vice chair of the board at that time.
Why would they do that?
I mean, to be honest, I don't understand. Like to this day, it was one of those where I'm looking around the room, and frankly, I felt like everyone in the room was a heck of a lot smarter than me and a heck of a lot more qualified. And yet, that was their decision. And whether it was the right one or wrong one, I guess that's for others to decide. But that was an example for me where I had to say, well, it wasn't my decision. They decided it. Well, then maybe it isn't my issue, right? Maybe I just need to look at myself a little differently. And, but the other thing that I think is really interesting about each of the imposter syndrome scenarios that I've gone through is if used correctly, it can be super powerful. Because when I look at the imposter syndrome, how I've learned to react to it, when you're younger, you almost want to run from it. You almost believe the talk in your head.
I think most people do.
For sure. And you almost need that outside party, right? Honestly, we were talking about this, right? We were talking about starting a podcast together around hustle. You were that to me, right? Where we were having this discussion of, well, yeah, I mean, this is something that needs to be shared. And this is something that people will want to hear. That talk, right, was an outside party saying, get off of it, just go do it. But what it does is, to me, it's allowed me to embrace that, to raise the bar. Because the other kind of underpinning of the imposter syndrome is you're not qualified or you're not good enough. Well, if you respond to that by quitting or paralysis, then it's taking it too far. But if you use it as a fuel to make whatever you're trying to do better and achieve better, then it can be a tremendous fuel, right? It allows you to think about, it might not be good enough. I got to raise that bar a little bit. But it's that fine balance of, if imposter syndrome is there, using it to fuel to maybe raise the bar so you feel more confident, you feel more better about what it is you're doing or what you're trying to accomplish, but not taking it so far that this thing has to be perfect, right? So, as an example with this podcast, for those of you listening, right, this is our second episode, and I'm sure when we look at our 50th episode, it'll be a heck of a lot better than our second episode, right? And the idea being there is nothing is ever perfect. Nobody expects perfection, but at some point, you just got to launch, right? At some point, you got to go and you got to start working through it, because at the end of the day, that's how you're going to overcome it.
I'm going to distill down what you just said to something very simple, and I believe this. I wanted to say this before: is imposter syndrome is healthy, and it's healthy for all of those reasons. I think if you don't get imposter syndrome, you could be overly confident. You could be borderline arrogant. And I think those things can set you up for failure, because if you have imposter syndrome at times and you overcome that, because it's just momentary, in my opinion, whether that moment be for a day, an hour, a week, whatever, you think about things differently. You're compassionate. You're typically caring. You want to understand. And someone who always just thinks, I've got it, I can do it, right? And it is good to be confident. But to a certain point, I think there's a such thing as getting to a level where you can set yourself up for failure. And have you seen that in the workplace? Have you seen that in business?
Absolutely. I mean, I've seen it in myself. right? I mean, there's times in your career where you just, and there's, to your point, there's some benefits to blind confidence in certain parts, right? Because, there's plenty of people that had they not had blind confidence, they may have never done it. Right. So there are times and efforts to do that, but for sure, I see that, in our company and companies all over the world, really, they see it constantly where it's, that individual that just doesn't recognize, that the bar is higher. Right. And they're overly confident. And well, I get that you're confident, but you're not quite there. But the interesting thing about that is if I were to choose, one or the other, right, the overconfident or underconfident, that either extremes can be a real big problem. But to me, I spend, more time with people that are not confident enough, getting them to move along. Because with the confident people, even if you're a little bit overconfident, you tend to be moving. You tend to be just diving in. And, yes, there are some people that you want to kind of shake and be like, maybe you should have a little bit of imposter syndrome, right? But, those that are less confident, and a lot of times, and again, that's where hustle leadership comes in, right? Is getting them to see the path, and you are capable and you are going. And to me, that's where, when we started talking about kind of what Hustle Nation looks like, right? Like, what's the value of the community coming together, right? Is if we're all believing in this, we're all hustling, we're all trying to achieve, we're all trying to kind of break through, what benefit is that in us? It's because, people like you and I and the listeners and, all those part of, Hustle Nation, we can support each other too, right? So when imposter syndrome is slowing one of us down, not only can we support each other, but we can be real with each other to share, this is, you maybe need a little more imposter syndrome. Maybe you need a little bit less. But, ultimately, to your point, I couldn't agree more. It is healthy. It's just, how do you manage it, and how do you use it as fuel and guidance so that you can achieve your goals?
Yeah, you said something that's important there. Be real. I'll share a very quick story. Being around a tech startup in the fleet space, which you're familiar with this business of mine. Yeah. My business partner and I were looking to hire our second or third sales guy. And so we kind of going through the motions of hiring, and we found someone who we thought was very impressive, who seemed to have a relatively successful track record that we could afford. And as we got it narrowed down to the top three, this gentleman said, "Are you ready?" And I said, "We're ready." And he said, "But are you ready for this kind of growth?" And I said, "Well, what kind of growth do you envision?" And he said, "Well," and keep in mind, this is a company that at the time barely made six figures in revenue, very small. He said, "I'm talking about massive growth." I said, "Okay." Well, he's like, I really believe this could be a $5-10 million company this year. I thought, okay, well, we're already 3 months into the year. That would be impressive. And he's like, "Can you guys handle that?" And I said, "I could handle it, but frankly, I don't know that that's sustainable. I don't know that that's realistic." Now, do I want $10 million company? Yeah, absolutely. But Dustin, how many people do you know in real life or know of that have scaled a company with that kind of overnight success? Now, to me, I don't. I've never heard of overnight success. I, in fact, heard one person say, "You know what? I've enjoyed overnight success after churning out podcasts like this for 6 years."
Yeah, exactly.
So,
exactly.
Needless to say, we did not hire that individual, but I look back and I say that is overconfidence, and that is not being realistic. I want people to be a little excited, and I've done this too. Been so excited where I've set my goals and my objectives a little too high, and I fell a little short. But that's okay. Yeah. It wasn't 10 times or 100 times too high.
Absolutely. And you do see it all the time. I mean, there's kind of that age old rule, the 10X rule, right? Where it's going to take you 10 times more work or 10 times harder than what, you probably think. Right. And we see that so often. Now, you don't want to set easy goals, right? You don't want to set goals that just, that was a cupcake goal, and that's not even going to be hard to catch. Right. But one of the things, we've talked about a lot in our company is, how many organizations have said, we're going to double in the next X years, right? 5 years, 2 years, 10 years, whatever it is. But how many actually do that? So few do, but so many stand up in front and say, we're going to double. And the reason being is because there's no plan, there's no strategy, there's no underpinning to it, right? To your point, there's no realistic view of it, right? So like when I look at our organization at McClone, we're growing at a very rapid pace. I mean, we've grown by over 50% in the last 18 months on a decent sized base already. Well, okay, but what does that mean, and how do we sustain that growth, and what is the next piece? Well, it's not like you can just wish it to happen again. And to your point, the overnight success. Why has that happened? Well, it's been 15 years of building stuff. So it's not like, oh, well, this year was great. Well, yeah, okay, true, but there was 15 years of thankless nights and grinding and hard work and all that sort of stuff that kind of leads you up to that point. And so there was there's a quote out there, the harder you work, the luckier you get. And, to me, I always go back to that because, to your point, so many people are like, well, this is an overnight success and this just came out of nowhere. When you really peel back the onion, I still have yet to talk to someone that is truly successful, not winning the lottery, but truly successful, that it just happened randomly. Maybe their organization scaled very quickly, but if their organization grew very quickly, it was probably because they had built relationships, a team, a plan, an organization years and years prior to that. And then they just happen to be right time, right place, and were able to scale it.
That's true. I mean, you think about successful businesses that have been started. My first business, which is a seasonal entertainment business, took me 16 months to start. And it was convincing my wife, one, that I should do it. And two, it was planning, market research. Will this work here? Is there a market for this? Can I get this approved in the city? So, you look and I say, well, okay, well, in January, I'll be around, that business will have been established for 7 years. But really, it's like 8.5 years because there was a lot of pre-planning, a lot of work, saving of money, et cetera, to go into it. And I had to be realistic. And if I wasn't, obviously, you can't fast forward 8 years and still be around. But yeah, it's just so important being realistic. And then going back to the thing about the goals you mentioned is, okay, we're going to double in 5 years. Okay, great. Well, how do we do it? And what does that look like in 6 months? Or as I heard in a podcast the other day was, okay, so we have these goals, right? We're going to look at them once a year, right? Okay. Well, most companies I know look at their goals once a year. They're not very successful. So why don't we have quarterly meetings on this? Why don't we have half-hour quarterly meetings and say, okay, are we on track for goal X? Are we on track for goal Y? If not, why? And what are we doing to fix that? And so I think smart, measurable, attainable goals, sometimes even, I think, setting the bar at a level that's low enough that you can just crush that goal. Now, not on purpose, but to the point where, okay, well, we want to be 20%, but let's say 15. And if we get to 22, hey, we're going to look pretty damn freaking good. And whether it's 15, 14, or 22% over where you were the previous year, that's still fantastic. And so I think being real and setting goals together go together just like the H and U and hustle.
Absolutely right. Yeah. And to me, it's, whether it be corporate goals or personal goals, it's amazing to me on how, who do you think is more likely to achieve their goals? Somebody that looks at their goals every day or somebody that looks at them once a year? I mean, clearly the person that looks at them every day is going to be far more likely to achieve those goals. And then you start building to what's underneath it. I mean, it's amazing to me. So, we deal with thousands of companies around the country in our business. And, it's always interesting to me in that, how many organizations talk about growth. And then you say, okay, well, like, how are you going to achieve that? And not only a lot of times is there not a strategy, there's not even necessarily the math underneath it, right? Which is, okay, to grow by 15%, how many new customers are you going to need to get? And if you need that many customers, how many potential customers do you need to talk to? And based on that, how are you going to talk to them? And how many reach outs do you need to do to talk to them, right? Or what is your marketing strategy, or how are you going to get in front of enough people? And we talk about it all the time in our business. I mean, our sales team would always joke to me. I actually even made a T-shirt this year where I say it's just a math problem, right? And ultimately it's way oversimplified. But a lot of these, if you know your metrics as an organization and you know what you're driving to your point, if it's a SMART goal, right? So it's actually measurable. You can actually tell whether you hit it or not. If it's measurable in the long run, it should be measurable somehow in the short run. And so if you can measure those daily activities, think about fitness, right? I mean, if you're wearing a wearable tracker, why are those helping people get more healthy? Because now you know your stats every single day, right? And how you can compare each day, even maybe how you compare within a day. Well, imagine if you can apply that to your business. I'm not saying have wearable KPIs maybe, but you get the idea.
Some people might need those though.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like we need to have another episode focused on goals, how to achieve them, and defining what a SMART goal is, which I think we'll save for another episode. But episode number 2, all about the imposter syndrome. I hope that there were a lot of people listening and watching who took a lot of value from that. I know this subject will come up more in the future, specifically with our guests, and it certainly ties into HUST and LE, no doubt. Dustin, final thoughts?
Use imposter syndrome for your benefit. It happens to us all. Don't let it stop you. Let it fuel you.
I would say know that it's momentary, or let it be momentary, then step on it and squash it like a bug, because you should know in your heart of hearts that you're capable. And that's one thing I want everybody who's watching and listening to take away, is that you can and you will. Don't let these things control you, because it is temporary. Outside of that, thank you for watching. Please like, comment, share, and we hope to see you back for episode number 3. Peace.